Diver breaks down, lost bell, the Wildrake disaster. A forgotten maritime catastrophe and its harrowing tale. What started as a regular mission quickly became a fight for survival. In today's video, you'll see how brave Richard Walker and Victor Guile are as they face a cold abyss, technical problems, and the ticking clock of an unforgiving sea. Join us as we peel back the layers of this gripping story and get ready to be captivated by a story of bravery, tragedy, and the dogged search for answers in the face of the unknown. Wildrake's diving accident happened in Scotland on August 1979 and tragically killed 2 American divers. They were doing a regular dive in the North Sea when the diving bell they were in got disconnected from the main lifting cable underwater, where it was very deep. So let's get into this accident more in detail. In March 1977, they set up something called a single anchor leg mooring, or a SALM system, in the Thistle oil field. This thing helped load oil into big ships. It had a floating thing called a buoy, which was connected to an underwater base. But by 1979, in January, the buoy got partly disconnected. They tried to fix it by blowing up the buoy with explosives and sending it for repairs, but that actually damaged it more. So divers had to take the underwater part to Norway to get it fixed. In the beginning of 1978, a guy named Brian Masterson started a company called Infabco Diving Services Ltd, and this company did diving work underwater. They got a job from a company called BNOC to help near the Thistle Alpha platform. It turns out that one of the BNOC managers helped Masterson see what other companies were bidding for the job, and later people thought Masterson might have paid money to get these contracts. On June 18, 1979, Infabco got hired to put the SALM back together in the Thistle field. Now, there's a ship called the MS Wildrake. It was made for diving and owned by a Norwegian company. It had a special diving system inside. Another Norwegian company built the system. In May 1979, Infabco started talking about being the only ones allowed to use the Wildrake ship. In July, they got everything ready on the Wildrake ship for diving. They got a certificate saying that their diving system was good to go. They did lots of practice dives to get things ready for connecting to the buoy again. While all this was happening, they made some changes to the diving setup. They replaced a part that held the diving cable, took away a weight, and tied some things down to keep them from falling. They wanted to make sure everything was safe, especially because similar accidents had happened before. Also, the Wildrake ship's diving setup didn't have something important to keep the hatch out of the mud if it got stuck on the sea bottom. In late July and early August 1979, the divers on the Wildrake ship worked to connect the SALM buoy back to its underwater part and get it ready to move to the Thistle field. On the night of August 7, 1979, 2 divers named Richard Walker and Victor Guile were lowered in a diving bell from the ship to a depth of 485 feet in the ocean. They were doing this to fix the SALM connection. This was the 30th time that they were using the diving bell from the Wildrake ship. As they lowered the bell into the water, something called a transponder, which helps locate the bell, came loose. The person in charge of the ship told someone to cut it off. Around 2:20 a.m. on August 8th, Walker, who was working outside the bell on the SALM, noticed that the bell had come off from the cable that was lifting it, and it was hanging at an angle by a hose that gave them air and support. He told everyone that there was an emergency and got back inside the bell with Guile. They closed the door to the inside of the bell. The bottom door, which opens outward, was left open but secured to the frame of the bell. The people in charge of the diving on the Wildrake, Peter Holmes and Brian Reed, thought that the hose they were hanging from was the backup plan to lift the bell, as designed by the company that made the diving system. But that company later said this wasn't true. Reed tried to lift the bell using the hose, but it was already damaged. The part that pulls the hose was made of a rubber tire between 2 metal plates. The hose got stuck between the tire and the plate. They also tried to lift the bell again using a crane on the ship, but this made the hose even more damaged. The bell lost power and hot water. They heard a faint message from Walker and Guile on the radio. The Wildrake crew lowered the bell to the seafloor at a depth of 522 feet. The ship called Stena Wilder came to help the Wildrake when there was trouble, but Stena Wilder's diving gear was being fixed, so they had to quickly get it ready for diving. Instead of using the Stena welder's crane to lift the diving bell, the people in charge decided to use the crane on the Wildrake. To do this, the divers from Stena welder had to attach a special wire to the bell. Then they would use the Wildrake's crane to lift the bell with the wire attached. At 6:09 in the morning, the divers from Stena welder named Phil Casey Smith and Eddie Frank went into the water in their diving bell to help. It was hard for them to communicate, and the lights on their bell weren't working well. They also couldn't easily locate the Wildrake's bell on the seafloor because it didn't have its locating device. After almost an hour, Casey Smith finally found the Wildrake's bell. He saw Walker and Guile inside the bell, giving him a thumbs up sign through the window. Casey Smith spent more time organizing the wire around the place where the bell was connected. Because of the way Stena Walker was positioned in the water, it moved around a lot, and this made Casey Smith's wire get tangled and pulled him underwater. The Wildrake started to lift the bell after Casey Smith attached the wire to the bell at around 9:02. Walker and Guile seemed very anxious, as the crane hook was not close enough to the bell for Casey Smith to attach the wires properly. They tried again, and this time Casey Smith managed to attach the wires to the bell at 10:10. When they tried to lift the bell, they did it at an angle instead of straight up, and the bell got stuck against the side of the thing it was attached to. The wires holding the bell broke. The crane came out of the water later, but the bell wasn't there. Diver Eddie Frank found the bell again. He saw that Walker or Guile had tried to cut the ropes on the weights to make the bell float up, but only one weight was cut. Walker and Guile were in very bad condition. The divers from Stena welder, Casey Smith and Frank, were very tired. They came up to the surface and were replaced by other divers, Michael Mangan and Tony Slayman. At 6:16 p.m., Mangan connected the crane wire to the bell again. At 7:37 p.m., the bell was lifted out of the water. They connected it to the equipment on the Wildrake, and a doctor checked on Walker and Guile. They were sadly pronounced dead by another doctor. The doctors later found out that the divers had died because they got extremely cold. On August 9, 1979, government inspectors and police went out on the Wildrake ship to figure out what caused the accident. One inspector found that there were many safety problems and signs of carelessness. The wife of Richard Walker and the family of Victor Guile hired a lawyer, Gerald Stearns, and filed a complaint for their deaths on July 30, 1980. They sued companies like Infamco Diving Services and Muller Roldan AAS. On November 28, 1980, Infamco Diving Services Ltd. was charged with a crime in Aberdeen Sheriff Court for employing Walker and Guile. At the trial, the diving company claimed that the divers were actually employed by another company, Offshore Coordinators Ltd. The court ruled Infamco not guilty. In May 1981, a court in the United States awarded money to Walker's widow and daughter and Guile's family. But this judgment couldn't be enforced in the British court system. An inquiry into the deaths was held in Aberdeen, where it was found that mistakes in diving equipment and not caring enough about safety contributed to the deaths. A documentary aired in 1981 suggesting that there might have been a questionable relationship between Brian Masterson and Joe Singletary, a manager at BNOC or BNOC. Lawsuits were filed in the UK on behalf of the Walker and Guile families, and defendants settled by paying money, although they didn't admit they did anything wrong. The Wildrake ship was later renamed Falinto Perry and used by the Brazilian Navy. In 2000, records about the Wildrake accident in London couldn't be found. So that's going to take us to the end of today's video. Remember, as we come up from the depths of history, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on more interesting stories about how people have survived and the secrets that lie below. Thanks for spending time with us today, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again next time. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.